So a few weeks ago, we did a video on rack pulls, and a couple people, excuse me, I get very emotional when talking about rack pulls. A couple people had a couple questions or comments, and it may have been on YouTube or Twitter, somewhere out there in the ether, on differences between rack pulls and block pulls and which one's better, that type of stuff. So let's briefly address that. So, first of all, most important point, from a training perspective, they are the same thing. Either way, you're elevating the bar, whether you're sitting the bar on the safeties, on the pins, or you're sitting the plates on some blocks. You're elevating the bar to reduce the range of motion. So, if they're the same thing from a training perspective, what's the big deal? For the most part, it's simply going to come down to what equipment do you have available. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've got a power rack, a squat cage, whatever you want to call it, and it's got safeties, it's got pins, and you've got a bar that is either a lousy bar to begin with, in other words, it's bent, or it's a bar that you're willing to allow to get bent. We'll come back to that in a second. Then I would recommend rack pulls. I would recommend rack pulls because they are super easy to adjust. They're very easy to adjust the height, you just adjust the pins, and they're extremely easy to load the weight, to adjust the weight. It's pretty much at arm length most of the time. It's like the easiest lift in the world to load the weight for, and the weights are up off the ground, so you're not dealing with having to try to put a 45-pound plate, and slide it on when you've got other 45-pound plates or bumper plates on here. So for ease of use, for ease of loading, for ease of adjusting, I would strongly recommend rack pull. But the key part is you've got to have a bad bar. If the bar isn't bad to begin with, if it's not bent to begin with, the rack pull will eventually bend it. So that's why you want to make sure that you're using a bar that you're willing to kind of sacrifice toward this lift. We're a relatively big gym, so we've got a couple bent bars, so that's not a problem. If you're at a home gym, that might not be an option for you. The reason it happens, the reason why you get a bent bar, is because when you set down a normal deadlift, the plates hit the ground, and the bar rests on the plates. However, when you set down a rack pull, the bar hits the pins, and now the plates are resting on the bar instead. And that's quite a jolt to the bar, and you can see it whip when you set down a heavy rack pull. So that's why over time, it's gonna bend a bar. So if you don't have a bent bar or a bar that you're willing to bend, then block pulls are for you. All right, so why a block pull? So if you don't have the ability to do a rack pull, a block pull, you're gonna need a little bit more equipment in terms of you're gonna need to construct yourself some blocks. You can do this in the example that you'll see here in this video. I'm a little out of breath now. I'm using DC blocks. DC blocks are great, but they're very expensive. We never would have bought them if we hadn't got a great deal on them used. You can also make your own blocks, pulling blocks out of wood, rubber. You can cut up a horse stall mat into a bunch of pieces, stack them. Maybe we'll make a video on that someday. So it's very handy. So on that end, it's gonna be very nice to your bar because now the plates are hitting the quote unquote ground and the bar is resting on your plates. The only downside, and so it'll save your bar, so you don't need a separate bar. The downside to a block pull is just that it's kind of a pain compared to a rack pull. This is like a first world pain, not that big of a pain. It's just really nice to do a rack pull. So it's just a little bit of a pain to adjust the plates because the whole thing is sitting on the ground. You can use a deadlift jack if you got the fish hook like we do, you can use that, but the bottom line is block pulls, rack pulls, essentially the same thing. Rack pulls are more convenient if you've got the equipment for it, but block pulls are just fine. Be kind to your equipment. Hope this helps you get stronger and live better.